Welcome to the Leading Generations podcast from Antioch Bible Baptist Church in Gladstone, Missouri. Each week, the podcast focuses on helping our church family live out its mission of leading generations to make disciples of Jesus Christ everywhere. Thanks for listening.
Welcome to the Leading Generation podcast. Thanks for joining us today. We don't ever take it for granted that you spend time with us each week. It means the world to us that you would take time out of your busy schedules to listen, to join in with us. So glad that you're here today. I'm excited about the next two podcasts. We get the opportunity to have Micaela Walker, our elementary ed director, back on the podcast with us for a specific purpose. This is not an interview just to continue to dig into your story, but it is for a specific purpose, something that I've been wanting to discuss with her for a long time. About a year ago, I believe it was, you guys read through the Anxious Generation book as a kids ministry team. Is that correct, or just you?
No, it was just me.
Okay.
Todd sometimes hands me assignments of, can you read this book and tell me how it is?
Oh,
Should
nice.
we recommend this to people? So this was just one of those books he dropped off on my desk that he wanted me to review for him. So,
nice.
Yep.
Yeah, so I couldn't remember. I was trying to remember the other day, like, how did we come about this? But yeah, so Todd gave you the book, asked you to read it to let you know if this would be a good book to recommend to parents.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So the book that we're talking about, that we're going to discuss over the next couple of podcasts, is the book Anxious Generation, and it is by a guy by the name of Hyatt is his last name. How do you
Jonathan Hyatt.
Jonathan Hyatt, right? Like,
sure.
I
shortened it to Height because I said, I don't know how to say this.
I think it is Height. I think I saw, I was listening to a TED talk by him, and it said, like, it's that idea of height, but it's spelled what?
DT at the end.
Yeah,
so
right.
There's no vowels there, and I didn't know what to do.
Yes. So Jonathan Haidt, Anxious Generation is the title of the book. And so we're going to look at that book over the next couple of weeks. But here's what I want to do before we jump in the book. And I think it's important for us to talk about it because it is where our kids live at. So if you have teenagers, if you even have kids, like elementary age kids, they live in a iPhone social media world. And I think it's important for us as disciples of our kids, as disciples of the kids in our church, we need to know what's going on in that world and the effects iPhone social media is having on our kids. And so we want to take time to talk about that as a podcast community, as a church community, and just think through the implications of this for our church. But before we do that, I wanted to just lay out what we believe about our worldview. So this Jonathan Haidt is a atheist. Like, he says it in the book. There's no he's not hiding that. As you read through the book, you're going to see that his worldview is very different than our worldview. And so I want to be clear going into this, how we see the world versus how Jonathan and those maybe who think like him, how they see the world. So I think an easy way to picture this is Jonathan would see the world from a man-centered view, whereas we see, as followers of God, followers of Jesus, we see man from a God-centered worldview. So we call this a biblical worldview versus a non-biblical worldview. A biblical worldview starts with God, all right? So if you read the book, and Micaela's going to give you a good overview of the book, so you don't necessarily have to read it after watching our podcast, but we start with God at the center versus they're going to start with man at the center. So as you read the book, you're going to find he's talking about the evolution of man, right from nothing kind of idea. So in millions of years, that term's used a lot. And he's going to even talk about creatures and like how we, looking at animals and how we see this same thing in animals. Very different, right? We have a very different worldview when it comes to that, where we see God as the creator of all things and man is created in the image of God. So very different. I mean, we can obviously learn stuff from the animal world, but we didn't come from the animal world. We came by a divine designer. We were created by God. And so I've thought about a couple of verses just to get our mindset as we discuss the book in the right place. Colossians 1:16 and 17 says, "For everything was created by him in heaven and on the earth, the visible and the invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him, and he is before all things, and in him all things hold together." So you hear what Paul's saying there. Jesus, God, is the creator of all things. That's a very different mindset than what the author of this book wrote the book with, as he was thinking about what the data that he was looking at. So very different perspective there. And then Second Peter 1:3 says, "His divine power, God's divine power, has given us everything required for life and godliness through the knowledge of him who called us by his own glory and goodness." So I like that idea of he's given us everything required for life and godliness through the knowledge of him. Well, how do we come to know God? We come to know God through his word. So again, two things that are going to be very different. They come back to man, they come back to research and say this is sort of what makes you who you are, whereas we're starting at a different point. We're saying God is the center of everything, and his word is what guides us and directs us. It gives us everything that we need for life and godliness. So, Micaela, before we jumped in the book, I just wanted to sort of start there with our church to let them know that, again, this worldview, a little bit different than our worldview, a lot different starting places. But as we're reading through this book, as we're sharing it with our church family, we're coming back to the fact that God is the creator of everything, right? The Word of God is the starting. The Word of God is what we're going to for life, godliness. So always bringing it back and putting it up against what does Scripture say? What does the Bible say? And so thank you for taking time to do this with us. This book came out a couple of years ago.
It did, yep.
And I remember when it first came out, so much talk about it. Like you'd be at a baseball game and I'd have parents come up and be like, "Hey, have you read that book?" kind of thing, because it was so, the data that he shares was just revolutionizing a little bit the way parents were thinking about social media and iPhones. So I want you to walk us through the book a little bit. So give us sort of how the book is broken down, a high level overview of it.
Sure, yes. So he structures it very clearly. There's 4 parts to the book, and each part serves a different purpose. But part 1 is a lot of data. It's the charts, the graphs, the statistics, and it's all pointing to Gen Z, which is, people argue, but 1995 to 2010 is what he's arguing is the people born during that time is Gen Z. But the numbers of their anxiety, their depression are going up in 2010 is where he believes this starts. And so the data, the graphs, the charts is showing that it didn't just gradually incline around this time. It was like skyrocket straight up in the air on a chart, right? That their mental illness there's a problem. And in 2010 is where it started. And he's looking at some heavy statistics. It's about things like angry outbursts in classrooms, but also clinically diagnosed depression by psychologists. It's also about hospitalizations due to self-harm or attempted suicides. Like, these are heavy numbers he's going over. All just to convince the readers that there is a problem that happens around 2010. Part 2 is then his conclusion of what he thinks started this problem. He calls it the Great Rewiring. And it was an argument that social media and smartphones, it's that combination of both, is these were given to children before even they became teenagers, that like preteen stage where they're most impressionable, most vulnerable. This generation is given smartphones with access to social media with non-existent virtual guardrails, right? It is just unrestricted access. He's arguing in part 2 that it has rewired their childhood, but also into adulthood of children need free play. They need independent play. They need to be able to assess risks, like physical risks at a playground. They need to be able to climb the risky things and self-assess danger and critical thinking. And by putting them in front of a phone, putting them in front of screens, you're taking that away from them, and it's causing problems as they're getting older too. But that's all a part 2 is the cause of the issue from part 1 is that combination of social media and smartphones.
Yeah.
Then part 3 is directing it more towards the results of it. So now that we know what's wrong, why it happened, now why should it even matter? And he goes through, there's 4 main issues that he points out, but it's like social deprivation, sleep deprivation, attention fragmentation, and addiction are the 4 that he really hones in on, how it affects girls and boys differently. Girls typically are more affected than boys by this, but just looking at this is serious, and these are reasons we should be paying attention to this data.
Yeah.
And then part 4 is his personal charges to 3 different, I guess, types of people. So the first one is to the government and technology companies to take accountability for the harm that they're causing intentionally, unintentionally. But for them, a second chapter was just towards like school administrations and school boards. And then the third one was to parents. And it was just a plea of, we have this information, so what are you going to do about it, essentially? So that's kind of how the book is broken down, and that's what it's talking about throughout it. So
So he starts with the data, sort of the here's what the data shows us, here's what it's caused, and then
you get the end of part 1, and you're like, wow, there's a problem, and then that's the point. He's trying to convince you before he ever makes any conclusions. It's a problem.
Which is I thought he did a really good job at that. Of like, the data is showing us this. There's a huge problem. And then I did like that part 3 where he talks about phone-based childhood. I think the verses is like a play-based childhood, I believe, right, is how he says that. So that phone-based childhood that our kids are growing up in now, and what the effects of that are. What social deprivation, sleep deprivation, attention fragmentation, and addiction. It just that was interesting to see that. And then I do like how he ends the book where he talks to government and talks to the parents, schools. Like I think that's neat, bringing it down to that level. And even in the parent section, I like how he had different, like if you have a 0 to 3, I can't remember
the teenagers, preteens,
right?
He broke it down
here's
by
some
age.
ideas of ways to work through technology with them. So I thought that was really, really good too. All right. So again, high level, these are four parts to the book. How would you summarize the book? So if you had to get it down to one sentence, couple sentences, how would you summarize the book?
I would say that he does a good job of not blaming parents for Gen Z. This isn't part of my sentence yet. I'm just explaining. He does a good job. He's not blame shifting anything. The sentence would be, parents of Gen Zers didn't know the dangers that were going to be in the hands of their kids when they offered them smartphones, but now we do. So what are we going to do about it? Is kind of how I would, there's no excuse now that we have all this data. It's not to shift blame, but it's, now we have to do something.
Yeah, I think that's a great summary of it. Like, now we didn't have the data. Now we got the data, so we need to do something about it. And we'll get to this, but I like, it's a discipleship issue with our kids now. So we can't be like, well, it's not affecting them. Well, now we know it is affecting them. So what are we going to do about it? Because God has given us our children, and we need to be good stewards of our kids. And at some level, even for our own hearts, right? Like
Absolutely.
The thing in reading through this book was I had to examine my own heart, and I think we'll get to that in part 2. But it's not just for our kids, but how it's even affecting our own lives.
Absolutely.
I would summarize it. I think he uses this phrase over and over again. So just to build on what you said there, he says this idea of overprotection in the real world and underprotection in the virtual world. So what he's found in his research is that we tend to be overprotective in the real world. So, I love the part where he talks about parks. And it's like showing the pictures of here's parks from 50 years ago, a lot of danger to the parks that our kids have
like
today.
Bubble wrapped now.
Right? Yes, very much so. So we've become a society that's been overprotection in the real world, but we've underprotected in the virtual world. I think that is a good summary of the book, because it's again, that's sort of what he's doing through the argument is, man, we need to really rethink our how we're thinking about the real world versus the virtual world.
Yeah.
So why is it important for us to discuss this book? Why is this book useful for us as a podcast to spend a couple episodes thinking about?
Yeah. I mean, you touched on it too, but he's not writing to Christians. He's not using the term discipleship anywhere in this book. No. But as Christians, this is important. We are called to disciple our children and protect them and to guard them and raise them up according to Christ. And this is something every family, every household is going to have to make a decision on where they fall, on how social media and phones are going to be used in their home, whether it's complete abolishment or unfiltered access. So you're going to have to make a decision somewhere on that scale of this is how we're going to choose to do that. And I think it's important that you do that with information and knowledge, but also biblically, like that you're praying about these guards that you're putting up for your children and what that will look like. And I think this book starts that conversation really well. Now you mentioned it, God, the word of God is where we start. It's also where we end, right? We have to turn back to it. This book, we'll get to it, but that doesn't quite finish the conversation well, but it's such a good conversation starter and it really brings attention to a heavy topic. I also think it's very compelling data. He's a good, it's a lot of graphs and charts in that part one, but it's easy enough to read and it's very convicting as you read it. It's hard to read that and be like, it's not that big of a deal, right? It is. And I think if there's someone watching this that thinks we're overreacting or thinks maybe it's not that serious, this book is for them because I think it is that serious. And some people know that. Some people are very aware of that. But if you're not, I think this book is perfect for you because I think it really make sure that you don't have an excuse, that you understand this is serious.
Yes.
And also, it does affect everybody. I think that's one of the parts that was convicting and eye-opening for me is like these algorithms, which you talked about, I think, a year ago on this podcast, but these algorithms are intentionally trying to steal your attention for as long as possible. It's for their revenue that they can keep your attention on their site for longer than their competition. That should alarm us that people are vying for our children's attention. That is something we need to be very aware of and cautious of how we approach that. This is not a neutral thing. This is very addictive by design so that they can make more money.
Right. Yes.
That's alarming, right?
Yes.
But it also affects everyone. So even if you do all the right things, and he has 4 specific steps that in his charge to parents, he says, you should not let them have smartphones before high school. That's step 1. Step 2, do not give them social media before 16. Let them get past that really impressionable age of when they're most susceptible to negative mental health things. Get them through that. So 16 is for social media. Give them more free play as children, early childhood. Give them more unsupervised time to play. And then 4 is to go phone free in schools is the 4 charges he makes, which Missouri has passed that bill. That's a win for Missouri. But even if you're doing all of those things perfectly, this will affect your children. For girls, he uses the word contagious. Depression is contagious amongst teen girls. If your daughter is not on social media, doesn't have a smartphone, but is in a room of girls who have been doom scrolling and finding discontentment in their life, he used the statistic is 142% more likely to bring her down with them, right? That's concerning. It's going to affect our kids, even if you do all the right things, not just girls, but boys too, of if you're sitting in a room, we've all been here, you're sitting ready to talk and people are scrolling on their phones while you're sitting in a room with people ready to engage, right? Even just the presence of smartphones in the world is going to affect your children in some way. And if you don't think that's true, he's going to prove you wrong, right? Like that's what this book does really well, I think, is making sure you know it's serious, but it does apply to you in some way. And you need to be informed so that this doesn't blindside us in the effects that it might have on our kids.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
So let's summarize
Okay.
why the book is useful. It's useful because it wakes us up to the reality of what's going on in our kids' lives, in their hearts. and the effects that the phone, social media is having on them. It's a discipleship, I think, why it helps us have a starting point of a conversation with our kids about this. So I would say, obviously this episode, we're not going to get into it, but next episode where we get down to the practical things, I think it's important for us to come with humility to our kids about these things. Like Absolutely. Even if you've let your kids have a phone and then you hear this and you read this book and it's like, man, I got to sort of draw that back. This is a good book to like, hey, I want you to read this. And this is why this is important. And if they're younger kids, obviously that's a different conversation. But I think as parents, it's okay to say, I didn't know this and now I know it and I want to disciple you well. I want to lead you to the Lord well. So we're going to set up these boundaries, these guardrails, because I've been overprotective in the real world and less protective in the virtual world. So I think those are two compelling reasons why this book is useful for us. I was thinking about, just as we close out this episode today, again, just sort of giving you the heart behind why we're doing this and what the book is about, why it's going to be useful to you. I thought about Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 through 9, where God says, Listen, Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, with all your strength. These words that I'm giving you today are to be in your heart. Repeat them to your children. Talk about them when you sit in your house and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Bind them as a sign on your hand and let them be as a symbol on your forehead. Write them on the doorpost of your house and on your city gates. I love in this Deuteronomy 6 where he is saying it's following Jesus, following God is all about life, right? Yeah. Like you talk about it when you sit in the house, when you go, so along the way, you're having these conversations. Well, as we're thinking about that in light of our biblical worldview, starting with God, the phone and social media is affecting what the conversations we're having along the way. So I think if we want to be the Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 9 kind of families, and we want to talk about God, we have to have this social media, iPhone in view so that we can best disciple our kids towards loving God with all of their heart, soul, mind, and strength. So thank you for joining us today. We'll see you next week as we get to the positive things we can take away from the book and even some maybe negative things where we would see it differently and we want to help in that. And then bringing it to a close of here's some practical ways we can live out this idea of discipling our kids in social media, iPhone world. Thanks for joining us.